my book. And then she came back to my shop and bought like everything. So now I'm sending her some art and a knitting book. I'm going to sign those. We don't have any books in yet, but I hope I'm getting them all out today or the next few days. I'm so grateful for all of your patience, and I'm sorry. People are asking me if we're going to have nuclear war with Canada, so people are losing their minds. A moment. I wonder what she thought about my depiction of basic training, but I guess she probably liked it. What's fun with signing the knitting book is that, like, I can just say, I hope this brings you joy. Not like the other book, which is like every trigger warning you've ever heard of. Okay. Oh, I'm glad I'm inspired you to learn to knit. That was like a nice side effect that I didn't realize I would have on people. Just like getting people more into crafts. And when I finally do my writing workshop, we're gonna do that. We're gonna write for like 90 minutes, and then we're gonna do crafts and talk about selling. I'm actually a much better salesperson than I am an author. Interestingly enough. Anyway, I have pinned the book if anyone wants one, because I will finally be able to do that again. Ooh, the Sharpie is gone. I never realized one human could use so many Sharpies. But here we are. And then my stamp. Yeah, well, supposedly they're back in stock. Today's the day. The other thing that today is the birthday of the cult leader who started Children of God. And right on cue, we have a New York Congresswoman filing to have Donald Trump's birthday be a holiday. And just like every single time you're celebrating your cult leader's birthday, it's a cult. Every time. It's part of the deification. It's part of them convincing you that they are godlike, whether they use that language or not. So is having their photo everywhere. And I like, every time I talk about things like this, I'll be like, this is the weapon of liking. And, you know, you can see Taylor Swift's face everywhere. And people are like, don't all artists do that? And they're like, okay, then you can see artists' faces everywhere. Be like, having a distinguishable vernacular is isolating. Well, don't all lines of employment have a distinguishable vernacular? It's isolating. I also came up with a new way to fix education. I had just been saying pay teachers $100,000, which I thought, because it's well above the median, would be good. But I learned last night that like teachers in DC already make $100,000 and it's still not enough. So it's like you have to pay teachers enough to live where they teach, which is to say top dollar. And then things would start to fix themselves. It's my theory, but most of my human motivation theories include give them more money. Hello, Boston. So, I managed to get a whole Harvard master's degree and only go to Boston twice. Once when I signed up and I wanted to buy a t-shirt, and the second time on my birthday when I graduated, 20 years after I left a cult. And Tom Hanks was our speaker. It was a very cool day. So yeah, like the birthday thing. Yes, a living wage for everyone would be nice. And this is like, I don't know. I always just say that mine and Mr. Knitting Cult Lady's life is a testament to the fact that universal education, universal income, and universal healthcare are just like a great thing. We're both 100% disabled. We're figuring out the ways that we can contribute still to the community. What just happened? A veteran sibling may be eligible to use post-GI Bill benefits. Who knew that? We should definitely look into that. All right. Oh, and I have brought a thing, which is my jar of Hey, thanks for finishing my book. I'm probably feeling a little woozy right now. Oh, I made these bird's nest earrings, but the shells are actually too heavy for the yarn, so they don't really stay up. Okay, printing labels. That's what I'm doing. Printing labels. And I'm going to the post office. Then I'm going to record with Hey White Women. Record Hey White Woman with White Woman Whisperer. That's how that should have gone. All right. Oh, no real topic this morning. Just doing book mail, hanging out. We were talking about how when you celebrate the leader's birthday, it's a cult. Because today is the birthday of David Burke, who started Children of God. And so my whole life until I was 8, which was when he passed, we did the fast, and we had to like fast and pray and commit to God and blah, blah, blah for 3 days. Cults always want you hungry. And then when he passed on to heaven, graduated, it became the feast. And then we would celebrate his birthday for 3 days and pray and recommit to God and do all the things. This chapter, actually, you can read in Uncultured when this happens. And I start like just looking around the room as everyone's like weeping and wailing over this man whose face they've never even seen till right now. And I was just like, this is acting. We are acting right now. Yesterday I pitched my musical to someone who might maybe invest. I just have to write a script. And that's hard, specifically because I'm trying to write this book. And also, I appreciate you typing money into my bank account. And also, Obviously, Christians celebrating your leader's birthday. America, President's Day is George Washington's birthday. You know, just doing it all the time. So the book that I have out is Uncultured. That one's pinned here. We're doing signed copies of that one. That's a memoir. It's like my story of growing up in the Children of God and then going into the army and then being like, hey, look, these are cults. Then I wrote a 150-page manuscript, so it's not a fully developed 200-page book, but it is a second memoir called Un-American, but then it wasn't the right time to publish that. So we put that down and we started working on a book called Culting of America. And that one is, I mean, done enough to be out of my head. I'm working through my first full like editing pass, and then it's going off to the editor. And as I'm getting those chapters back, I'm reading aloud each chapter and putting it on my Matreon. That's one of my benefits for those subscribers. And then I also made a video book of Un-American, which you can, like, if you've read Uncultured and you don't want to wait, you can go listen to it or watch it. After I publish Culting of America, I want to publish Un-American. But then also this sort of holiday season, I gave birth to the idea of a full-on musical, Uncultured, the Cult Baby musical. And it's going to be like Book of Mormon, but for all cult babies, meets women soldiers on the stage for the first time, and patriarchy and white supremacy and all the things. I'm super excited about it. And I also have not even a tiny bit of time to write the script for the musical. And also Mr. Knitting Cult Lady just broke his arm. Because, you know, you got to have all the things at once. So it's looking like it takes me 3 to 4 years to put out a book, is like the honest answer. You always think it's going to be less. And like, for some reason, I thought I was going to do 12 research papers in a row that nobody was making me write in 1 year. Like, I thought the Culting of America was a 1-year project. I'm now realizing it's a 3.5-year project at best. So that's why, like, when I came up with the idea of the musical, I'm like, oh, I want to like debut it the day Felon 47 leaves office. Like, that gives me 4 years to develop the thing. And I never do any of this by myself. Like most people, to write a memoir like Uncultured, it takes them a decade. And I specifically, when I had the idea, I was like, it is going to take me a decade to learn to write a good book. And I don't have that. So I'm going to go get a partner. And I did. And that was a very cool experience, actually. But yeah, like a decade is not an unreasonable amount of time to spend on a large product like a book or a musical or anything. And then I also have started, because there was like Culting of America will be kind of boring, which is silly. It's my special interest project. Obviously, it's not boring. But I also started working on a novel series, which I have been sort of planning in my brain in some ways since I was 18 years old. And I listened to Isabel Allende's Hija de la Fortuna, Daughter of Fortune. And I had this idea that I was going to write like epic story that is like Isabel Allende meets Uncultured, but it's 5 generations of mothers and daughters that come under religious extremism. And I've just started it, and it's like loosely based on my family, but I also just get to make it up, and it's historical fiction. And I just started it, and I'm doing the great grandmother character, like my great grandmother character. And She's basically Reba McEntire's Fancy meets Lynetta Jones, Jim Jones's mother. That's fun. I ended up writing Uncultured, which is a memoir with 2 fiction authors, and I learned a lot about that. What's just happening? Add a file, local files. Thank you. And in fact, when I went back and read the Daughters of Fortune series, I was like, oh, look, this is what we did with Uncultured. Like, we played with the characters in all these ways. And, you know, like, there's a very specific moment in the climax of the book. If you've read it, you'll know, where like something happens and everyone bursts into tears. And like, I knew I was being delivered to her, but I didn't tell the reader that, because you can like do different things to make like the force of feeling you experience in that climax moment. Like, that's how I actually felt living through it. Even though it wasn't like a surprise to me. Or like, a lot of people in the publishing process were really concerned. There was like, there's so many names, right? Because you're talking about a commune, you're talking about being in the military. And like, you know, we did a lot of work, like nobody is named unless they need to be, which usually means they're going to come up again. But also, oh, it's so overwhelming for the reader. Yes. Welcome to being in a cult, right? Or being a woman in a military unit. You know, like, it's overwhelming. There's a lot of interesting things, and I am much more of an entrepreneur than a writer. And I was like, and this, like, you know, I've actually been publicly criticized by other authors for like having co-writers, 2 actually, in fact. And I just don't care. I'm like, I didn't sell to Macmillan Books the idea that I was going to excavate all my trauma by myself. I sold them the idea that I would put together a fantastic product, which people would willingly trade $28.99 for in the thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. And I did. So we have sold at least 30,000 books. I know that. And it's like, I don't know. I'm a big believer in like, however you produce your art, like the art is still valid as long as you're not literally stealing it from someone else. But also, and this was one of the things I learned from like, not learned, but like put into words when I was teaching myself about the Drake Kendrick Lamar battle. And I was like, look, using ghostwriters or co-writers or whatever they're called, like, nobody cares. Make good art. But like, I'm not going to go pick a fight with a writer who wrote their memoir all alone on like who's the better writer, because that would be silly. Like I used to tell my soldiers, you don't get in trouble for being wrong. You get in trouble for being stupid. But also, like, no matter what you do, people will, on the internet and in real life, say super, super awful things about you and your book and your life story. And so, like, my biggest advice for you, if you write a book, is only read 5-star reviews. Only. I read one yesterday that was like, for this author to pull off this kind of that you see in fiction novels, super impressive. And again, if I was responding to that person, I would be like, thank you so much. I had a lot of help from 2 fiction writers. Not like trying to represent that I did it on my own. Which is funny because a lot of authors use co-writers or, you know, help, professional help, and then don't mention it very much. You see these little like mentions in the background. That was not the right thing. Uh-oh. Excuse me. labels. What I think about Diddy is helped me figure out how to talk about the Hollywood cult. So I was watching George Johnson explaining what's going on with P. Diddy, and he's like, people can give you power and people can give you money, but people can't give you fame. Right. And I've literally, as we talk about my publishing process, I've never related to anything so hard, because that was exactly what happened with my book. Like, I learned, like, oh, nobody can can make something go viral, not even these huge companies. Versus as now it's going a lot more viral because of what's going on, right? So it's timing, it's all these different things. But people who want to predate you will pretend that they can give you fame, right? Will offer that they can give you fame. And that was like this piece that I was missing, because cults can be led by a person or an idea. And Hollywood is a cult that is led by the idea of fame, that like fame is worth it. It's worth all the self-sacrifice and sacrifice of your children and blah, 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 and everything else for fame, right? And the lie of the promise of the cult is always a lie. Fame is shitty. Like, sometimes I just feel so heartbroken for Taylor Swift. And like, she got everything she wanted, and she's also stuck in a decision she made when she was 12 years old, which is, I want to be super famous. Oh, and who wants that? Okay. Yeah, but the Stanford prison study is like totally debunked, because they just were completely shisty and made it what they wanted it to be. Most of what we know about psychology, we know from white male American college students. We don't talk about that enough. It's kind of like the military going. So like in the military, men wrote the regulations for dealing with menstruation. And apparently they didn't talk to anyone who menstruates. So they just sat there and they were like, women need access to facilities with running water every 3 days because periods, they must have this. And then they wrote that in the regulations, and then they used that regulation to keep us out of combat and therefore advancement in our chosen career field, because you got periods and you have to have this thing. And all of us period havers are there going like, no, we don't. But as I always say, when a group of humans can't do something, you don't have to make laws and regulations to keep them out of doing that thing. And that's why they're not going to be able to like unwoke the military, because they had to work super hard to keep the military straight and white and male, even when it hadn't been proven that everyone else could do as good, if not better, of a job as the straight white men. And now it has been proven. I think it's so funny coming from the side of like, we know diversity is better. We know this. We even know this from an intelligence perspective. So like, you want to make Donald Trump's military weaker? Go right ahead. I will sit here and laugh at you. You know how much stuff I could just hide in this bun right here, and a straight white military man would never, ever find it? Blue-haired liberal. Basket weaving. My basket weaving is Morse code, sir. In case you haven't heard me say knitting is Morse code. Knitting is Morse code. Again. Oh, you printed out this person's name like a bazillion times. That's fun. It was funny because I got like 10 orders in a row from all these different women. And I was like, oh, somebody chose our book for their book club. That's so nice. Okay. Basic. Yeah, diversity is cool. He, our Secretary of Defense, the guy who would hold you down for the gang rape, like, is out here saying, like, the stupidest phrase in the military is our diversity is our strength. Like, our diversity is our unity. I'm like, I told you all my story about Mike from Southwest. Mike from Southwest, former Navy pilot, came and sat next to me at a bar in Ohio after my first book event when I was just like by myself at a bar in Ohio with my book. And we started talking, and I'm so sure everyone thought I was a lady of the night, because why am I talking to this 50-year-old man so much? And we're veterans. And then eventually, I say who I am, and I was one of the first women on deliberate armed combat, and I wrote this book. And at some point, Mike gets really, really, really irritated because I am not his idea of what women in combat should look like. And so, the evening comes to a close as Mike is yelling in my face, right? You're saying you can beat me like a man. And, I didn't have to do anything because there was immediately 3 generations of Air Force veterans at my back, brothers in arms, pappy, dad, and son. Like, ma'am, do you need help? But like, I was 2 seconds away from Mike getting a stiletto through the top of his foot because I was absolutely going to beat him like a woman. Sir, with no due respect. Like, I just love the argument of like, oh, so you think you could carry 300 pounds? Like, oh, you think you could fit through the same hole that I could and open the gates? Let's go. Much easier to toss me over a wall than it is my 6'2" husband, isn't it? It's almost like, which I think is very interesting because all of our management science is still stuck in the industrial era, where we thought that everyone being the exact same cog in a machine was the best outcome. And this is the only way we've ever discussed combat, is presupposing that men do it the best. And the only reason you would presuppose that men do anything the best is if you are a sexist. Thank you. Okay. Like, literally, we're equal humans. Why would half of the world not be, right? Like, insanity. But that's the only way we've ever talked about it. But what we learned in the information era is that everyone being a little different creates a lot of friction. Friction creates energy, and maybe that energy helps you go further. And that is why, like, special operations teams do not expect every soldier to be the same. You know what? None of the military does, because nobody ever told the 5'2" Asian man that he couldn't be in the infantry because he couldn't carry 300 pounds out of combat. Because you know what? That's not how it actually works. We actually give people different jobs based on what they can do. Crazy idea. Which one I just printed out anymore. I hope you all can just imagine me walking around the Tactical Operations Center in Afghanistan having these conversations with people. And the line that I am the proudest of putting in Uncultured is, Sergeant, are you mad that no man has been able to show me that he can do a push-up with his penis, and therefore you failed to fundamentally defend any reason why women can't be in combat? Also, someone named Danielle Steele ordered Uncultured, and we're just going with it. It's like the best celebrity name so far. I did make this sweater. This scarf is actually from Afghanistan. But the sad part is, like, I don't even want to make a Danielle Steele joke because I'm sure this person has been hearing it their whole lives. Just like I've been hearing, oh, military intelligence, isn't that an oxymoron? These ones aren't actually staying in, but like, I have probably made 100 of these earrings, and I really need to get my knitting cult ladies closet up and going because I'm making too many crafts. Oh. Oh, somebody reported me for saying that. That's funny. If it is her, I know. Well, I've also already told my family that when I go, it is to be, you know, like whatever service you want to have. But then the closet, and everyone gets to just walk through and take something. That is to be it might be a memorial, right? Like they might need more time to get that prepared, but. I think like this is one of the cool things about doing art is just like people everyone says that like human beings are looking for purpose, but what I think human beings are looking for is to leave their mark on the world. And so like I had a very cool moment when my book came out where I was like, there, I've done it. I've made myself immortal, right? Like you actually sign contracts to 75 years past your unaliving for your heirs, right? It's like, cool. I made something that's gonna outlive me. But also that's true when you do an art or a craft or something, right? Like these fuzzy coats that I knit, like they will be in the world. Something when I'm gone. I listen to Hamilton a lot. Probably every other day. No, remember 2 years ago when everyone's Spotify Wrapped diagnosed people with autism? They're like, you listen to the same song over and over and over again. Congratulations. This is called aural stimming. That wasn't actually what they said, but someone's last name is Mascarenhas. That sounds so Brazilian. I love it. Except that a huge number of Brazilians' last names are Da Silva and Da Souza because colonialism. If you haven't received the book, like I got on the day I was supposed to be receiving 500 books that Monday, that Friday, I got notice from the publisher who got it from the printer that it was going to be 3 more weeks. So today's the day they're supposed to be back in print, and I have been like fulfilling the orders 50 to 100 at a time as I could. So either it's on your way to you or it's going out by Wednesday at the very latest. Oh yeah, Santos is another one. This app is so awful. What color? I think I'm going to do blue next. The pink was not nearly as good as the purple for pissing off the bros. So I think blue, and then I can let blue fade to and then do green. That's what I'm order is going to be. But also, I'm lazy. I always had like this much of roots grown out when I shouldn't even say that I'm lazy. I'm bad at self-care, making the time to do it, because cults, aren't we all? So this week we're finishing up chapter 7 of Culting of America, which is us versus them. And I've had someone else contribute a little bit of American history because I don't actually know it that well. And I'm also probably finishing up chapter 8, which is exploitation of labor, which is funny because it's kind of the whole thing, realizing cults are about labor, but it's also like the shortest, most to the point chapter. It's about labor, especially of kids. It's about labor, especially of kids, and on and on and on. Okay, good thrift stores. So I live in Maryland, like near the university. So there's one here called, it's like Value Village and something else together. And that one's really good. There's one in Laurel called Red, White, and Blue. That one's good. Near Eastern Market, there's a store called Clothes Encounters of something. Yeah. Near Eastern Market. And I love that one. And there's a place called Uptown Cheapskate, which is pretty good too. Oh, I'm not reading anything right now. I'm just printing out labels. I'm just doing book mail work. Same thing I do every day. So when I first dropped out of a cult, of which commune I was living in Mexico, and into Houston High School, my older sister that I was living with gives me this binder to use, and she's done this sketch of Pinky and the Brain. And like, I have no idea what this is. I've just come from a cult. There's just a little cartoon on this thing. And just people would just like walk up to me and be like, "What are you doing today?" And then, or they'll be like, "Same thing you do every day." They would be saying the thing, and I had no idea what it was. And I've still never watched it, but now I know that I'm supposed to say, "Same thing I do every day, try to take over the world." Oh, no, I can't talk about my siblings. I can tell you that I have 24, and I can talk about the one who has passed on. And that is the end. But yeah, like, if you write a memoir, you're gonna blow up your life. You'll have many, many other great things from it. Well, you're definitely gonna blow up your life. Or as I like to say, when you're the one that analyzes the family gatherings in public, you get invited to fewer of them. All of a sudden, buying shipping labels is temporarily unavailable. Okay, so yeah, and like, I think I wrote my book because I always say, like, I didn't set out to write a book. Like, I walked away from my last like close attempt, and I set out to heal. And I didn't know that meant I was probably not going to see my dad or certain siblings again. And I didn't know that even meant I was going to write a book. And I didn't know that any of these things. But by the time I was explaining to family why I was writing a book, I was just like, I need my pain to count for something, right? Like if I'm going to stay here, I can't just be like this tortured, broken person. And I did, right? I had to heal, I had to transform, I had to do all of these things. And I wrote my story, and it has helped people. And it has, been like other people's guide, or, the thing that I care about the most, which is just like giving other people language and context with which to understand and then describe their own experience, which is what I got from reading other memoirs. And stuff that you wouldn't even think of, like memoirs of enslaved people and memoirs of, surviving Germany. So that was the thing, right? So I think it's like, it's the same as like my rule for saying I love you is I only say it when I can't not say it anymore. And my rule for, writing a book is like, don't write a book unless you can't not write a book. I mean, write whatever book you want, but memoir wise, like it's going to be really hard. And also I'm going to save you some time because everyone thinks they could just do an anonymous memoir, and like, you can't. We would all have chosen that if that was a thing. You're just going to have to be okay with it. And no matter what you do, people will say all the things about you that you are afraid of. People will call you a liar. People will say you are doing it just for the money, as though they don't have a job. All of the things you are afraid of will probably happen, and none of them will be as bad as you think. And you'll have a book in the world. But also, I'm brave because nothing anyone can do to me is worse than the things I've survived. I mean, so far in this country, we'll see where it gets to. But like finally realizing like, oh, the worst thing people are going to do is try to hurt me with their words. Like a New York Times bestselling author published shitty things about me by name, and like it hurt me, not at all. Other than emotionally. So that's part of it. But also you just get used to it, and you also just like, I think it's like, so for me, like stuff with family and friends is just more exhausting than anything else, right? Because like I'm on this other side, and also like I was the black sheep at 15 when I was thrown out of a cult, and now they're all out of the cult and they realize that I wasn't wrong, but then now I'm wrong again, so it's like, but it's just kind of tiring. And it's honestly, it's the same way I feel sometimes when I'm trying to discuss the misogyny of the military with women who are still in the military, or the same way I feel when trying to parent a 9-year-old who doesn't understand that like we've been 9, but she hasn't been an adult, so it's just like that thing. It's like, I know that I'm on the right side of history. I know that the people trying to shut you up are not the good ones, like I know that there's no way to just put your trauma aside and go raise your kids, but they're not there yet. And I have learned, the one thing I have learned is you cannot drag anyone else through your journey, except your mother. Your mothers are going to get dragged through your journey. Your parents are going to get dragged through your journey if they choose to stay in your life. And she has, which is lovely. Yeah, I like what others say about you isn't any of your business. And just like, the other thing too is like, if you're going to sell a book in one way or another, you're going to have a platform. And then whoever wants to say things about you is going to have a bigger platform than you. And still, when you're going at somebody, like, you look petty, right? So even at one point with these attacks, I was like, F it, I'm not wrong, right? I have lived my life above board as best as I can. I still just look petty. And finally, someone went and made a fake account with my college mentor's name. And I was like, oh, this is children on the playground. Like, I'm not doing this. I just moved on with my life. And I mean, it is sobering, and I get that family have a lot of feels about it, because that's the other thing. It's like, I got to tell my version. And unless one of them goes out and writes a bigger book than I did, then like, my version of my family's history gets to be what is out there. And that sucks, because everyone's version is different. You know, I kept looking I read like every single thing written about the children of God. And what I realized I was looking for was for someone to like tell my story. And then I realized that like nobody can do that. It's like, oi.
Chegou os livros.
A casa está meio louca agora, porque o Tom quebrou o braço. Estava no scooter eletrônico com gelo e daí... Por sorte, estava usando um capacete, mas quebrou o como chama isso?
O pulso.
O pulso e o braço. Então, está bem.
Mas chegou os livros, então.
Algumas. Ainda estou esperando. Hoje ou amanhã vão chegar mais 500 livros. Então, agora estou tudo de novo. Heyo! Yes, in Portuguese. Hey! Yep, 500 more. And then hopefully, so this is what I'm trying to figure out, right? And it's interesting because like, the traditional publishing world is only really set up to help you sell a lot of books like right at the beginning. So now I'm having to build it in myself, and we're not 100% sure we're going to keep doing all the signed books. There might just be unsigned books tagged, because I might actually just have to start ordering large quantities myself just to keep it in stock. And then I can't store 10,000 books in my townhouse. So I will have to have a fulfillment center get involved. So we're trying to figure that out. But what is exciting is that once we do Culting of America, I can also offer a package of both books together. So that will be fun. And I am going to make sure that every Culting of America book is signed, because I can do that with self-publishing. So it's interesting. Hey, I appreciate that I haven't given you any red flags. This is going to be printed in the book, but like before I started being online, I was like, I'm so creeped out by it. I'm so creeped out by the influencer thing, the guru thing, like, and a lot of that goes into honestly why I think my channel's interesting, because I have a rule with myself that I have to bring in like 25 to 50% of outside stuff. So I'm not like building myself up as a guru. But before I started this, I made what I call the guru gotcha checklist of red flags for leaders. And I made one for groups also. And I'm like, I made it to keep myself in check. And it's also fun because if I wanted to respond to people calling me a cult leader, which I don't need to, but I can just be like, point to what I'm doing. Thank you. I worked on my Portuguese a lot. Actually, when I was pregnant with Knitting Cult Baby, Mr. Knitting Cult Lady, who is a white, blonde, blue-eyed American that doesn't speak any languages, convinced me to raise her in Portuguese. And so in Seattle, and I threw myself into Portuguese. I spoke exclusively Portuguese to her for 5 years, which also means my Portuguese got a lot better. It's rusty now, because now I only speak Portuguese usually once a week. But it did sort of culminate in me being invited to give a talk in Brazil to the Intelligence and Security Committee in Portuguese, which I could do. And so I now speak better Portuguese than a uneducated 14-year-old girl, which is what I spoke before from growing up in Brazil. And I also speak Spanish because I went from Brazil to Mexico, Guadalajara to be exact. So I still say yo. Yo boy. I agree. Never put anyone on a pedestal, right? Or like Dr. Yanya Lalich, who's my favorite cult expert, she says there are no gurus. And this is one of my cult vaccinations. Like there are no gurus. Nope. And the other one I love is there are many valid ways to live a life. Because what all cults are doing, what all people are looking, not all people, what people who join cults are all looking for is the one way to live life, right? If you do this, and this is what cults promise, if you do this, if you are perfect, we'll love you just the way you are if you're perfect. And we promise you, usually after some space travel, perfection, salvation, perfect life. The promise of the cults is always a lie, right? It's not better, but that's what they're all promising. And so this is honestly, I think, why so many people go cult hopping for so long afterwards until they deconstruct. It's like you're still looking for the one way to live your life. And you're terrified because especially if you grew up in a cult, because your whole framework has fallen away. And in reality, you can do anything without a framework. It's just harder. And that's why my third phase of cult deconstruction is moving forward with no models. After you have the crack and the brainwashing and physically, mentally leave, and then usually do some time of refusing to deconstruct and going cult hopping. And then finally you start the decade of deconstruction, which might take you like 13 years if you're me. And during that time, you're understanding why you were in a cult, even if you were born in one, takes your family into account, and then what like impacts that had on your personality and identity. No, I don't think woke is a cult. A cult has to be a group. Always, every time. When we say Maga, we're not saying like the phrase is a cult. We're saying like this group, which has identified itself. I also got a very nice 5-page handwritten letter yesterday, which was only a little bit creepy because it came to my house. But then I realized that probably I had just forgotten to black out my address and give them my P.O. box instead. I mean, so everyone likes to do like the both sider thing, or I would just say like anytime you're talking about a cult, someone will be like, well, the other side is too. AA being my favorite, they'll be like, well, drinking is a cult. It's like drinking is a verb, friend. However, I now know the answer to both. So it's like, first of all, both sides, right? Like are culty because even though the Democrats are really bad at it right now, by definition, having only a two-party system is culty. It is black and white. One side defines themselves by not being the other, right? However, I wasn't selling 50 to 200 cult books a day when the Democrats were in office. So other people might not know that both sides are not the same, but I know. Hola. Yeah, so we got Knitting Cult Baby. We got 5 years of Portuguese and 6 years of Spanish. And she recently, now she's 9, and she's recently gotten back into doing like Duolingo Portuguese. And as I thought, like she has the perfect accent. She can do it, like so much of why they say like it's harder to learn a language or it's hard to lose your accent is just like learning to do those sounds, like even when I was new to Spanish, they would be like, oh, you don't like you have an accent, but you don't sound like a gringa. You sound European. And that's because I can make certain necessary sounds that other people can't make. I taught Mr. Knitting Cult Lady to just say a D when he's trying to roll his R's, because otherwise he can't make anything approaching that sound. Okay, but then my other thing of like both sides, right? People are like, well, how do we know we're not the ones in a cult, right? And so there's this handy little exercise you can do, which is like think of some MAGA people in your mind that you know well. And like if they had you under their complete control for 2 weeks, like you were a child or you had a broken leg or something, how many perspectives could they expose you to? And then you flip it around. And why this works is because cult think relies on isolation. Isolation doesn't have to mean you're picked up and taken out of the world and you're in someone's compound in Texas or Brazil. Isolation can just be, as the Mormons have taught us well, you can still be operating in the world like a little human meat puppet, but not actually being out of that mental isolation. And that's just the thing. Like, it's not every person who has studied cults has said it has nothing to do with your beliefs. Now, a year or more ago, before I stopped listening to the GW program on anti-terrorism because they won't do both sides of it. But they were saying that like every threat in the world right now is coming from a fundamentalist point of view. Okay. Even when leftist gets into cult like sort of violence or other stuff, usually they're getting to alt-right. One side is much more violent, and that becomes important. Right. And that's because fundamentalism at its core teaches you to be okay with doing violence to the outgroup for your in-group and your way of life to be able to survive. However, it doesn't matter what you believe. You can just write a story and then make that story the worldview for a cult. You know who did that? L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And he actually said in an interview, he was a science fiction author, and he actually said, you don't make millions of dollars writing books, which I am setting out to prove him wrong. But he's like, if you want to do whatever, you start a religion. If you want to make millions of dollars, you start a religion. And then he did. So it really doesn't matter what the belief is, right? And this was kind of something that we learned doing intelligence operations in mostly Afghanistan. I think in Iraq was a little more specific, but like in Afghanistan, we're like, it doesn't matter what ideology, specifically what little group, it's tactics, techniques, and procedures. They're all insurgents, and we're looking at it this way. I'm not here for the larger conversation on whether that was right or not, but just like it's a important transferable thing. And like, I'm this person that I'm like, it doesn't matter what you call it. We're never going to get most of society to call AA a cult, but telling people that they're going to die if they're not in your group, that is a cult tactic. And that's like one of my things with AA is like in 3 years now of studying this and getting thousands and thousands and thousands of stories, good and bad. I have never heard not one single thing that I cannot give you an exact parallel for from one of the world's worst cults, like Scientology or the Children of God, both of which are very good at getting people sober. And this is why in the musical we're going to have, is it a cult? Call it what you want. Call it what you want to. Right? Like, and that's another thing I've been telling people now. It's like Jehovah's Witnesses, AA, Mormons, military, like whatever. I'm not fighting with you anymore. Your people are coming to me with all the trauma of cult survivors so that I can help them pick up the pieces of what you did to them. So Call it what you want to. Here we are. The Way International is definitely a cult. And just like calling yourself the anything is culty and is a cult tactic, right? They're trying to convince you that they are the only. And like, who died and made you the Church of Christ? Don't say Jesus, right? Like, and this is one of my things with the cult expert, right? Oh, he was giving deconstructed cult uncle way before he fell into like alt-right crazy JK Rowling transness. Because like calling yourself the cult expert either tells us you're manipulative or you're not a cult expert. What gives? I do think gangs and cults are more or less the same. I think often the only difference between what we call a gang and what we call a cult is race and class. If these Zizians right now, if those were Black people, would they be calling that a cult? Probably not. But I do think that we just have, like, we have three sorts of groups that are on this very extreme end of group, which is cults, gangs, and terrorist groups. And I think it's important to know those parallels because when you can't find something in one area of study, a lot of times you can find it in the other. I use gang or terrorist groups and cults in my book quite a lot because I have experience with both of those, but not with gangs. And then also it's equally very, very important to know that there are different types of cults, which is like a cult or a commune cult, big cults. There are single family cults, which is usually coming up under a narcissist and an abuser, or sorry, a narcissist and an enabler, both of whom are abusers. And your, most famous example of this is Westboro Baptist Church, but also Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Unalived, which we just did in book club this month, is a really good version of that. And as me, someone who grew up in a commune cult, like I was shocked at how much I was relating to her experience of growing up under that narcissist in like a single family cult. And then also 1-1 cults, did I mention, right? Like abusive relationships. And again, it's important to know because all of these fields of study and really anything in the bad guy, bad experience arena is harder to study. It's harder to get data on. People are less likely to be honest. As Margaret Singer says, cults don't generally stand up to be counted. And when they do, they're inflating their population so they can seem more important. So I think it's really important to do these qualitative things. And, this is what I told the kids when I went to speak at Jefferson University. It was like, so first of all, like, I hate your cult definition. And I put this in the book at the end of the book, like, as a cult baby, I hate your cult definition because there's more to it than that. And so I read everything out there that I could. And then I went and literally sat in the dark and I was like, channel cults, what makes a cult? And I came up with my 10 piece that I thought was including most of what I thought needed to be included. And then I, started writing my book to show you that. And I think if I had just done that, I would have thought that it's about writing a book. I think maybe my post office people are here, so I need to go see about that. Somebody here? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Shh. Okay. Do a little bit more. And we got to go to the postie. Get you all these books. Please don't hang on Teal's every word. Like, you don't have to take my word for it. Every single person has warned about her. And also, she literally sues everybody that calls you a cult leader, and like that's a sign that you're a cult leader. I've been called a cult leader hundreds of times, and I've literally never even had to respond, much less sue somebody for it. Same goes for anything that ends in Oni Robbins. And like every cult puts out helpful stuff. That's how they get you. She thinks unaliving is a way to cleanse your soul. Like, please don't listen to her. She still, I think she does understand that she wasn't a victim of satanic ritual abuse, because I think everyone with a brain like now knows that that was made up. She was abused by a psychologist, but she's using that. And it's so interesting because as soon as you start talking about this, people will be like, how dare you, as a victim of abuse, question someone else? Because the satanic ritual abuse was made up. She did not experience that. That's a lie. Whether she realizes it or not, we know that. We are talking about teal swan. And also, in my musical, Woo Woo Lady is going to be wearing Bjork's dress, swan dress, but in teal. Sue me for that. But also, it's really fun to get sued for calling someone a cult, because define it in a court of law, please. And then prove that you aren't one. I can do that. She can. Yeah. We've done another, like she was raised Mormon. She was raised in a cult. She was abused by a psychologist who was a conspirituality, satanic ritual abuse, panic cult leader, right? All of those things are true. She was not a victim of satanic ritual abuse. And if she doesn't understand that, she doesn't need to be teaching anyone about healing. Be very easy. She could do everything that she's doing and just say exactly what I said. Right? But she doesn't. She makes the choice not to. But yeah, and like also just the unaliving thing. Every single time we look at cults and cult leaders, we find within like two separations or less, people unaliving themselves. AA looking at you super hard. Mormon children report unaliving ideology at the age of 7 to 8. Children of God children whose unaliving rate has been compared to survivors of 1930s Germany, 1940s Germany, we should say, report starting their ideology around 4 or 5. This is one of the signs. Like when I was looking at Zappos, I was like, culty, culty, culty. Oh, schmuicides. Yup. Like, unsurprising. I think it has everything to do with the fact that you're not allowed to be a person in a cult. You're literally living in a state of disassociation so that you can be a little meat puppet that can be labored. And you're being required to suppress your individuality. And it's why so many people have that ideology. And it's why on the outside, once we are able to take off that cult persona and figure out who we are, we're like not willing to go back in the cult closet. Because like, I'm always like, people are like, can't you just not talk about it? I'm like, no, I did that for 10 years and it almost unalived me. Like, I'm not doing it anymore. But that's also, you know, I think like those statistics, right? Like I like to give those to Children of God survivors and give those to Mormons and be like, it was that bad. It was. exactly as bad as that sounds. People are going to try to tell you that it wasn't that bad. But unfortunately, unaliving don't lie. And teal swan is very closely connected to several of those. And also, I will tell you that like everything, so Oni Robbins runs what are called large group awareness trainings, EST, Landmark, anything that ends in Oni Robbins. By the way, anything in the self-transformation space, predators are going to show up. And can we please just agree already that the dude who's a jerk to you is not a good leader? Like, stop it, sit down. Cult scholars have been warning about LGATs, large group awareness trainings, because they use cult tactics. And again, call yourself whatever you want, cult tactics. And Mr. Robbins is one of the worst, in my opinion. It was like, color me the least surprised when there was Me Too about him. So yeah, using cult tactics to make you feel like you're having personal breakthroughs. It's Nexium. They just didn't get around to branding people that we know of. A friend who was PR for the Army and a Mormon said I was a grifter. Okay. Cool. Once again, like when you're not a cult leader, you don't really have to respond. Like, I went to the Army Records Department at Fort Knox and asked them what I was allowed to say, and my book was cleared by the Pentagon. So please, say what you will. The Mormons got mad at me because I told the ex-Mormons, because I told them that they were not special. And that the only reason it's called Mormon face is because the Mormons are accepted enough to have had a study done on them. But it's the cult blaze. It's the same thing. I'm writing the Book of Mormons, but for everyone, right? And there's like really important thing for cult survivors to learn is like your unique individual experience wasn't unique. All cults are the same. All cult leaders are the same. And we had the same stuff happen to us. And now it is extremely important. It's extremely important to know that you need to have both. You need to have other, if you're a Mormon, you need to have other ex-Mormons that know exactly what it means when you say, when my shelf broke, right? But you also need to have other survivors so you can see the trends. Right. And this is true for veterans when they get out of the military. Like you need to have other veterans in your life that can understand what you're talking about. You also need to have people that don't speak military so that they can help you learn to translate your experiences. So, and I said, like, it was maybe unsurprising that the Mormons, the cult that is accepted because they're shiny white people, think that they're special. But they're not. So anyways. Then it was burn the witch. Yeah, the others are like, I had one person on YouTube wrote me this whole dissertation about how I, of all people, should not be allowed to sell signed books. And that one was fun for me. But it's the most fun for me when people accuse me of grifting or sensationalizing. And I'm like, one thing I've learned is that people in cults or who haven't deconstructed are only familiar with deceptive sales and deceptive business success. So they don't understand. I mean, even my husband barely understands that my Patreon subscription is like a service, a bunch of services wrapped up that I'm providing to people. Right? When you buy a book, you get one good book. However, it's fun for me because this whole process was like, you know, I even had once a person from Children, she was like, I grew up in Children of God and your story smells funny to me. I'm like, okay. I had famous grandparents, famous parents, and I was famous. And then on the outside, I was valedictorian of my college, heavily written about in the military, both for my running prowess and for being one of the first women that did one of these things. And now I'm a best-selling author. So like, it is crazy. Like, you do want it to not be true, some of the things that happen, because it's so bonkers, but like, there it is. Like, I think of the Pentagon just going like, we gave who a secret clearance? But like, I didn't lie. I put A Familia Internacional there on my clearance form. It's not my fault that they didn't go to Brazil and translate things. And you'll also get told that you are a narcissist and a sociopath, and people will say that about you. And you know what? There is, like, I understand now that like I had to go through a period of narcissism, because as I'm writing in the finale song of the musical, Living With It, because we were delayed adolescents, now we have to have our delayed adolescence, right? I didn't get to be a toddler figuring out I was an individual. I didn't get to be a teenager figuring out I was an individual. I was in a cult and surviving a cult. And so when I did set out to figure out that I was an individual, like, yeah, you have to talk about yourself a lot. You have to go through your stories. You have to, I mean, birthing a story of your life is an insane process, right? But then again, you're here on this side and you're like, yeah, that's what they say. And like, what can you, nothing. You can't, you know, as my Lord and Savior, Dr. Taylor Allison Swift says in Miss Americana and the Heartbreak Prince, like, when people fall out of love with you, there's just nothing you can do to convince them to still be in love with you. And I thought, like, at this time when all these women veterans were like piling on me and stuff, and I was like, I'll show you one day. But you realize, like, no, they're never going to read your book. They're never going to get it. It's fine. Also, almost everyone attacking me has not read my book. And that's one of the interesting things where it's like, you know, there was this whole group of, when I said I spent a career in aviation, they were like, aha, you see, she's lying. She said she was an intelligence officer. Yes, an aviation intelligence officer, which if you had read the 382 pages that I've given you about my life, you would know. And they're always trying to like catch me saying something wrong. But since I'm not lying about my life, I just happened to live an insane life. Like, you're not going to catch me in a lie, because it's funny how when you don't lie about your life, you don't have to remember what lies you told. And that's actually part of what's, I think, pushes people eventually into deconstructing. It's like, you can't keep up with all the stories you have to tell just in order to not say, I grew up in a cult and that's why I'm weird. And eventually you just figure that out. I got to go to the post office so I can get back in time to record my podcast. Thanks for hanging out.